Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily, the first English news program in Poland. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. The daily news publication Rzeczpospolita reported that the current head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, will be directly involved in the new political initiative in Poland in an attempt to come out ahead in the 2019 Polish parliamentary election over the current ruling Law and Justice Party.
The new initiative will be called the June 4th Movement, in reference to the 30th anniversary of the partially free elections of 1989, when the communists started to gradually share the ruling powers over Poland with a handful of controlled opposition. The first independent government was formed over 2 years later, in December of 1991, and was toppled by former communists on June 4th, 1992. The name June 4th Movement therefore sees controversy for being associated, in some circles, with the return of the old guard from the former communist ranks. Prior to his political career in the EU, Donald Tusk was the chairman of the Civic Platform, the main Polish opposition party. The Civic Platform is now under leadership of Grzegorz Schetyna, and the possible return of Tusk is likely to raise tensions. Grzegorz Schetyna is not a politician who forgets and will resent the step taken by Donald Tusk for sure. I think he will do everything to ensure that the return of Donald Tusk to politics in Poland is extremely difficult. If Donald Tusk wants to return to Polish politics, he must have his own structures to start his bid in the future presidential campaign. This is how I interpret the news about the new movement. The June 4th movement is to be something bigger than a party and aim to unite all oppositional forces, though the movement sees resemblance to that of the present Civic Platform chairman's initiative to create a new anti-government coalition, which was said to brought about the downfall of the parliamentary club of Nowoczesna party. The recent rankings reflect Donald Tusk to be the strongest opposition politician, with the highest chances to win the presidential elections in 2020. Everyone is taking that into consideration, and he could be the representative of the wide democratic opposition camp, but at the same time he has his tasks before the fall of this year, and we have to consolidate our forces without counting on him to come to our aid. The political commentator Rafał Ziemkiewicz believes that the name June 4th Movement could easily be interpreted as the return to the old agreement between communists and soft anti-communists, known as the Round Table, and naming a movement with reference to the partially free elections of 1989 would be a political suicide. Personally, I think that this news is not a rumor. I think this will happen. In my opinion, Donald Tusk did not invent the idea. He simply got the order from his superiors that he must return Poland to the oligarchy currently ruling in the EU. I think that much of his political maneuvers speak for the very fact. The term in the EU office comes to an end in the fall of 2019, and if rumors of Tusk's return to Polish politics are true, it is possible that his term will be shortened.
The diplomatic spat between France and Italy has been taken to a new level as France recalled its ambassador from Rome due to the alleged unacceptable behavior by members of the Italian government. The issue centers around migration policy, Italian support for the Yellow Vest protest movement, and Italy's decision to shed light on French neo-colonial practices in Africa.
Relations between France and Italy worsened as soon as the new populist government took power in Rome. A spokesperson of Macron's party told the media that the policies of the Italian government made him want to vomit, while the French European Commissioner Pierre Moscovici called the Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini Little Mussolini. In return, both Salvini and his coalition partner Luigi Di Maio, the party leader of the Five Stars movement, have praised the French Yellow Vest protest movement, as well as condemning France for neo-colonial practices in West Africa. The spokesperson of the French government, Benjamin Griveaux, says that the Italian support for the Yellow Vest is unacceptable.
La France a fait depuis plusieurs mois.
For many months, France has been the subject of repeated accusations and attacks without basis from two members of the Italian government, Mr. Di Maio and Mr. Salvini. There was a call to vote against the president, to support the Yellow Vest movement and to question France's initiative in Africa.
À mettre en cause l'action de la France en Afrique.
Meanwhile, the Italian Minister of Transport and Infrastructure, Daniele Toninelli, says that Di Maio's recent meeting in France with representatives of the Yellow Vest movement is completely normal, since the Five Stars movement is planning to invite the Yellow Vest to their political group in the EU after the elections to the European Parliament in May. The fact that Di Maio and the Five Stars movement, a major political force in Italy, met some representatives of an opposition political force in France is not strange, and it is not meant to put any pressure on the French government. The French government has allies in Europe, with political parties in opposition in Italy. Is this strange? Do we need to protest the fact that President Macron is allied with the opposition parties in Italy? It's the first time France withdraws its ambassador from Rome since the Second World War. Commentators argue that the conflict is expected to continue at least until the European elections in May.
According to the latest opinion poll conducted by the estimator pollster on a request of the dojeche.pl website, the currently ruling Law and Justice Party would still come out on top in the upcoming parliamentary elections, although it would need to form a coalition with some other parties to hold majority. The new left-wing party Spring would finish third, which would be a great outcome this early in its conception.
The 39.7% polled by the publication would get the Law and Justice Party 224 seats in the parliament, which would not be enough to have majority. The biggest opposition party, the Liberal Centre Civic Platform, would finish second with 28.2% of the votes, that is 157 mandates. According to the survey, the recently established Robert Biedroń's Spring Party would get the score of 8.6%, which would amount to 31 mandates. The last two political groups that would get into parliament would be the Kukiz 15 movement with 7.4% or 27 mandates, and the Polish People's Party with 5.9% or 20 mandates.
Security at the U.S. southern border tightens as 2,000 migrants gathered at the border in the city of Piedras Negras of Mexico across Texas, hoping to enter the U.S. The migrants attempting to cross into Texas through the Eagle Eye Crossing are now in a temporary shelter guarded by military police.
The US President Donald Trump has taken a tough stance on immigration, especially against the Central American migrant caravans, and is considering the suspension of granting asylum to migrants who cross the US-Mexico border illegally, in hopes to slow down the thousands of Central Americans entering the United States. Meanwhile, the Mexican government has been offering work visas for the migrants as an alternative for those immigrants pressing the border with economic incentives. I'm waiting to see if the Mexican authorities will help find a job. The idea for mothers with children is to ask for political asylum on the other side. If we can't realize our dreams, it's difficult to go back. For those that want to go to the US, hopefully they get the chance to realize their dreams. If not, then go back to your country, because it's better to come back alive than dead. In the recent State of the Union address, the US President Donald Trump brought attention yet again to illegal immigration and the financial strain and safety hazards they impose on the Americans. President Trump has stated that any migrants seeking asylum will have to wait in Mexico whilst the claim is heard. But this has not deterred these migrants south of the border.
That's it for today. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily. But stay tuned for the Poland Daily Weather Report.
I'm Aleksandra Zarzycka and welcome to Poland Daily Weather. Let's take a look at the forecast for tonight. Temperatures will drop a little up to 4 degrees in Szczecin. In central Poland, temperatures will range about 0. The coldest place that night will be Podlasie and Lubelszczyzna with -1 degree. Overcast skies is expected almost in every region. Let's see the forecast for tomorrow. Temperature will increase to 10 degrees in Kraków. On the northwest, we will see a lot of sun. Light rainfall will appear across the Poland. Let's check the weather for the next days. On Monday, temperatures range from 3 to 6 degrees. A lot of snow will appear on the northeast. In central, we will see a lot of rain. Tuesday will bring us more snowfall, which will appear on the east and in central Poland. On Wednesday, temperatures will range from 1 to 4 degrees. Pressure will grow up. Thank you for watching and see you soon.
The Polish flag carrier LOT Polish Airlines is expected to be one of the main winners from the Polish government's decision to build a mega airport in the vicinity of Warsaw by 2027. Ultimately, the central communication port will have a capacity to serve 100 million passengers a year. LOT is hoping that the airline will serve many of the passengers traveling between the USA and Central Eastern Europe, using the new airport as a regional hub. For that to happen, introducing visa-free travels for Poles to the US will most likely be necessary. To improve the chances of that happening, LOT has launched an information campaign aimed towards decreasing the number of Polish rejected visa applications to the US to under 3% of all applications. Such a low number would make it possible for Poland to finally enter the visa waiver program, and as a result, Poles will be able to fly to the US without having to spend money, time, and stress on the visa application process. The carrier served almost 9 million passengers in 2018, a 100% increase since 2016. The airline has added 66 new routes since 2016, bringing up the total number of routes to 107. Possible travel destinations in the US from Poland include New York City, Newark, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami.
Poland Daily Business Edition. Our guest tonight is Adrian Kubicki, spokesman of LOT Polish Airlines. Sir, welcome to the show.
Hello.
And we will talk about the connections to the United States. There are at least 10 million people who have Polish backgrounds. That's probably the second, third generation of the Polish Americans. The United States used to be extremely popular travel point to Poles in recent years. Yet there is one major obstacle. There are visas to the United States. And if you're Polish, you don't need visa to Japan. You don't need visa to South Korea. You barely just need notify yourself in China, but okay, there is a visa. You have no visa whatsoever to Europe, but you do have visa to Sudan, Bahrain, and the United States.
And among them, United States of America.
Yes, and you think, wow, why should I do that?
The general trend also probably with developing systems of security that actually doesn't require this sticker, this paper to put it into your passport. The general trend in the world is actually to waive visa because it's confusing and it's probably interrupting also relationships between countries on a major scale and major level. And we think it's exactly the case with Poland and the US. Polish people would like to travel to the US not only to move there and to work there as illegal employees or to visit their friends or for whatever other reason. They also would like to go there to open up startups, to invest also.
Or take your children on the vacation to
or just a pleasant vacation on the beaches of California or Florida. Exactly. But yes, there is still this problem of having of this requirement of having United States visa in a passport, and we are really working hard to waive it, because Poland definitely should be among the countries which do not need visa to the United States.
As a hauling company, delivering your product is travel by air, people and cargo. This is accidentally within your core strategy.
This is the core strategy. We are on transatlantic routes to the US already for over 50 years, one of the oldest in the entire world, oldest connections. So this is definitely our main market, and we see that we have reached out to the ceiling. Basically, we cannot go through the roof without waiving visa. And our estimates show, analyses show definitely that waiving visas would really boost the demand for travels to the US. And again, not for people who would like to emigrate there, but for people who would like to do business with the US colleagues, who would like to spend their vacation there, basically also supporting US economy, which is ironic. Coming to this point, we are actually working with Americans very hard. Remember that we are buying Boeing airplanes. One of our Dreamliners is of a value of 200 million US dollars. And when we decide to put it on a certain route, we consider it as an investment, because we can fly on this airplane to whatever country we'd like to, but we would really be more than happy to invest it to our connections to the United States. But again, we have to work all together to waive visas for Poles. Otherwise, we will have natural blockade in growing
When we are
business
talking
ties.
about growing the airline, it's inevitable to say about the new project that's located between Warsaw and Łódź, that I'm speaking about the Baranów area and
Absolutely.
Solidarity Airport.
Central transportation hub, which is a must for not just for Poland or for Central Eastern Europe, but it's must it's desperately needed by the entire Europe. Which struggles from lack of sufficient infrastructure in terms of airports. All airports which we know from the major hubs in the Western Europe are overcrowded, cannot grow anymore. There are
too close to the cities.
None of the vivid plans of expanding them or building other airports. And here we have a project that can actually reshape the aviation situation in Europe and create a gateway, especially for these Europeans living in the eastern part of Europe, a gateway to the major world destinations. Of course, it will take time for us and for Central Transportation Hub to build a sufficient number of connections comparable with Frankfurt, London, or Paris, but we have to start with something, and we definitely are able to open major connections to major cities, global cities in the world, including many points in the US.
To stay with the US, this airport will enable a lot of airlines to deliver more connections to the States?
Absolutely. First of all, we already struggle with the limitations of the infrastructure in Warsaw, which really lower down significantly the speed of our growth for next couple of years. We have to look for other airports and other ways of growing our business, because growing it at the Chopin Airport, despite great cooperation with the airport authorities and working together on expanding the capacity of the airport, is pretty much impossible. So yes, this airport is the only chance that the number of connections, number of frequencies is going to be enlarged within probably the most important time in the history of European aviation, because the boost of demand in the Central and Eastern Europe is the highest ever, two-figure digit every year. Up to 15-16% growth projected forecasted by IATA, for instance, for at least next 30 years.
So when this new airport will be desperately needed, like
this airport, well,
yep,
as soon as possible. If you would say,
you're
like, we need a week, we need a week to move there. So if there is a chance, no. But to be very honest, we're trying to be realistic, but also optimistic, and we really work hard on helping on whatever level is possible to create it within 10 years, build it and open it within 10 years.
Because we are talking the new road connection. There is a highway.
It won't be, of course, airport has to be connected. It has to be a proper hub, which means that, and intermodal hub, which means that...
For those who don't know, this is very near the central crossing of north, south, and east-west
crossing
highways.
of the highways and also railways, so meaning that the point is selected particularly for this purpose is also to help to build it in a shorter rather than longer period of time. We have different experiences. I understand that skepticism is also there, looking at the Berlin project, which is going too long. But on the other hand, we have other examples like Istanbul airport, which has been built within 5 years' time, and it's going to be great success. So we would like to rather follow this second example. Being realistic also with the European Union procedures, we give it 10 years. We think that it's sufficient time to open it.
I will still stick to this United States analogy because we are talking
Obviously.
about the visas to United
Sure.
States, about growing the number of visitors from Poland to United States, from United States to Poland. We have like those thousands of soldiers who are serving here, their country, of course, but also sort of
And hopefully
NATO.
more to come.
They will probably like to come here with their families later in their life with their businesses here to Poland. And we would love to get them here in a professional, efficient way.
infrastructure.
Yes.
Well, yes, so we talk about the opportunities that new airport might bring, together with waiving visa for Poles. Our dream is to convince U.S. administration that the new airport can be great point of so-called pre-clearance.
What is
Pre-clearance meaning administration officers, the immigration officers working on the border of the U.S., not at the airport of entrance, but at the airport of departure.
So that Warsaw, if everything will fit ideally, will be treated as entrance to the
To the
U.S.
United
port, and
States.
from Warsaw to Chicago you will fly like a domestic line.
It will be considered domestic flight, meaning that landing in Chicago would give you the direct entrance to the city without queuing in lines in the immigration points. And obviously, whoever experienced that at least once knows exactly what I am talking about and
It's
why
not that
this
bad,
is
but
very
anyway.
well. It depends on the time of your arrival, and it's going to be worse because you have to remember that the U.S. also struggles with the lack of infrastructure, and the demand and number of flights is growing. So it's not going to be easier; it's going to be more difficult rather at all major airports in the U.S. However, from our perspective, having pre-clearance at Central Airport means that we will have the best airport for transferring people from all over the world to the U.S.
Huge opportunity in front of us. Hopefully,
But we have to waive visa first.
we will seize it. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Thank you.
Kubicki, spokesman of LOT Polish Airlines, was our guest, and that was it
Thank you.
for tonight, Poland Daily Business.
I'm Aleksandra Zarzycka and welcome back to Poland Daily Weather. Let's look at the forecast for tomorrow. Temperature will increase to 10 degrees in Kraków. On the northwest we will see a lot of sun. Light rainfall will appear across the Poland. Now let's check the weather for our continent. In the Balkans, temperature will range from 6 in Bucharest to 13 in Athens. Still warm on the Iberian Peninsula. Temperatures will range between 30 to 14 degrees. British Islands also with good weather with sunny sky. There the temperatures will range from 7 to 9 degrees in London. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
Stefan Tompson was born in Great Britain. He is the author of short educational films about Poland, its history, and its current events. These popular films are often focused on setting the record straight in the foreign media, which often seems to misunderstand what's happening in contemporary Poland as well as the historical past. His films are in English and designed to address a foreign audience, which all too often believes that the Second World War began in 1941, or that Poles attacked Germany.
Okay, welcome to Poland Daily Culture. I'm Jon Carter, and I'm joined here today by Stefan Tompson.
Good evening.
Welcome to Poland Daily Culture. So, Stefan, you're a YouTube creator. Could you tell us a little something about the way in which the process involved in making a YouTube video?
Well, the process of creating a YouTube video, of course, depends on the creator. There's a number of ways to do them. When it comes to the videos I make, in particular the ones about history and the sort of the political history and the role Poland played in the Second World War, it usually comes as a reaction to something. So if there is a specific event that has happened, or a specific lie that is being perpetrated, that is being spread, or a specific piece of misinformation, that's something that I would want to directly react to. Be it the Israeli response to the IPN law last year, or be it recently a leaflet that was circulated in Greenpoint that represented a number of symbols. There were neo-Nazi and Nazi symbols, and among them there was the Polish anchor, which is the emblem of the Polish resistance. So that will be my starting point. Usually, it will be something controversial, something that is very widespread, something that is gone viral for all the wrong reasons, because it is false. And that will be my sort of starting point. And then I'll sort of build a response to it. And that basically involves writing a script, creating, trying to make it visual as well. So it has to be more than just someone telling a story. It has to be someone showing a story. And of course, there are a lot of photos from the Second World War. There's actually a lot of footage as well. So it's combining a story with visuals, and recently I've also started working on sound. So for example, when discussing the pilots from the 303 battalion, we will have a very faint sound effect of planes flying in the background. And it's something that actually not very many people, you notice it subconsciously, but most people won't be able to tell you, but in fact they're sort of hearing the planes because we're making them hear them. So that's that process of creation. And then of course there's an element of editing, and trying to make the editing seem as discreet and as invisible as possible. That really, you don't really want anyone to notice the editing. You sort of want it to be seamless, and that would broadly be my process for creating something. And this is obviously very specific to those sort of several minute clips in response to something. There are a number of videos I've done which have been mini documentaries or even documentaries, where the process is of course a lot more complex and a lot longer and a lot more difficult. And another format I've done quite a few times is just street surveys, which involves just basically stopping people in the street and asking as many people as possible questions and trying to gauge the feeling. And that's more about just sort of representing, trying to sort of convey a sense for an opinion or a belief, and one I really, that was very difficult to make was going to Berlin. And in Berlin, we asked the inhabitants of Berlin what they thought of the improper term Polish death camps. And it was incredibly nerve-wracking, actually, to stop people. And we stood by the memorial of the murdered Jews. So it was a very symbolic place, of course. And we stood there and we sort of stopped these people. And it was incredibly difficult. And it was quite a fascinating, that was actually, in terms of content creation, I think that the other story I gave is a little bit sterile. It's not really that interesting how it's made. But this, I think, is interesting because there's this really emotional, very human element to it. And you're standing there and you're stopping someone who's German, and obviously we obviously trying to get people who looked German and who weren't tourists. And you stop them and you ask them this really difficult topic. And there was this very broad mixture of reaction from absolute horror that someone would dare ask them that, and the sort of, I'm not going to talk, to the complete refusal of answering the question, say I want absolute fear of this question in a sense, to this sense of deep regret, and to also complete oblivion. I mean, one of the people I interviewed was convinced that Poland was an ally of the Nazis and was deeply responsible. So there was that, in terms of creating, a lot of what I do is also trying to get, that there is a historical truth you want to convey. And that is what I aim for, is to be as close to that truth as possible. But to present that truth in a more exciting way, it has to be emotional. There has to be a connection to it. So even in that process I was telling you, in that very sterile process, I will also try, there will usually be, and a few people have actually sort of called it out, but I've never hidden this. They've sort of said, oh, your argument is based on emotional music and emotional rhetoric. And I sort of say, well, sure, but there is a whole series of just very hard, dry facts that you cannot argue with.
It's quite bland without it.
It would be, I mean, no one would want to listen to it because there's no connection to it. So that's something I try to do, is to get an emotional response. I want people not only, because that is actually what people end up remembering. Most people will walk away from the video and they won't be able to tell you how many Polish righteous among the nations there are, but they will be able to broadly convey how they felt after watching the video. I was moved, I responded emotionally, I teared up even, or I was angry because I disagree with this narrative. So that's what I want from that's the sort of, that's what I'd like to evoke in the people who watch my things.
Earlier you mentioned a recent video that you made in defence of Poland, and this is a kind of it kind of touches on a broader theme which you often go into, which is about misconceptions of Poland abroad. Could you tell us why, broadly speaking, why these misconceptions exist? Is it ignorance, or is it something deeper that someone, groups, organisations are trying to misconstrue, the facts as they are?
The great, the great subject of conspiracy theories, which get lots of views on YouTube.
Speaking of going up and up,
that is a great example of it. I think broadly I believe there are two reasons. One has been a complete inability, first a disinterest, and then an inability by the Polish state to take its message abroad. That was partially due to 50 years of communism, and then due, for several reasons, economic hardship. I mean, it's hard to spend lots of money on PR when you've got other more pressing problems at home. So it was an inability during communist times, a lack of will to do it, and a lack of funds in the more recent post-communist era. That's one aspect, and that's Poland's fault. That would be one aspect of it. The other aspect linked to that is Poles themselves. However, I try to never ever say anything negative about Poland, but I also always try to tell the truth. And the mass migration of Poles, especially in the 90s and then in the early 2000s when the European Union opened their borders, there was a lot of the shift in perception came from that. And that was linked to a lot of things. The Poles that left very often took low-paying jobs, were working in specific sectors, and some of them behaved in a pathological way, but they were quite a large minority, and that is one of the areas where a minority represented a broader concept. It's this idea of where anecdote is not data, but most people take it as data because that's their tangible experience. It's their emotional response to something. So they see a drunk Polish person, and then all of Poland is a nation of drunks, more or less. And then finally we get into that sort of wonderful conspiracy theory area. And that, I think, is the more interesting one, especially in context of the Second World War, where I think Germany, and in particular Austria, and this is an interesting one because when the Anschluss happened, the Austrians greeted Hitler as a savior. Yet no one really associates Austria with Nazis for some incredible reason. So these two nations, which have been very guilty, and a number of nations which collaborated, it is not in their interest to have a country that proves that it was possible to do otherwise. And I think, I believe, and I think there is some evidence to point to this. I don't think it's a mindless conspiracy theory. there is definitely elements of politics and political decisions which point in a very specific PR direction. And I think Germany has very consciously chosen to use the term Nazis, this disassociation of going from they weren't Germans, they were Nazis, and then this idea, which is more and more common, that the Germans were the first victims of the Nazis. And it's, in fact, if you look at it purely from a PR perspective, it's incredible. I can't help but admire them for it. I mean, I wish that Poland conducted their PR in a similar fashion.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today we are at the Warsaw Citadel, a structure built by the Russians in the 1830s and later on used as a prison for political dissidents and fighters of the January Uprising of 1863 to 1864. Some of the prisoners held here would later on become prominent figures in Polish politics, while others were executed or sent to Siberia after imprisonment. Today, we will talk to some of the experts about the specifics of the Citadel, the January Uprising, and more history about the era. Our first guest is Michał Cieślak, junior custodian at the Museum of the 10th Pavilion in the Warsaw Citadel. War stories are usually promulgated by its most colorful commanders. And can you tell me something about the January Uprising, about his most prominent commanders and those who really make the story colorful?
The January Uprising was truly a period of time during which very special people made their mark on history. The first person worth mentioning is Ludwig Miroslavski, who was one of the earliest commanders of the uprising, but his position at the top was very short-lived. He first gained fame during the 1848 Spring of Nations. Back then he was a very young man and he risked being sentenced to death for his activities, but his life was saved by the German nation. This didn't allow him to enjoy tranquility as he continued conspiring against the partitioning powers. He also liked theorizing about the art of war, and he was also an inventor of various types of weapons. He planned to use some of them during the uprising, for example the so-called farmer cart, meaning a type of cart with sights attached to its sides. The cart would be pushed by the insurgents, who were heavily armored and protected from Russian projectiles. The idea was for the cart to slash its way through the Russian lines and create panic within the Russian ranks. Unfortunately, the idea had to remain on the drawing board as the Poles lacked the technical capacity. In order to build such strange vehicles, factories would have been needed. Miroslavski in time became delusioned with the uprising, and a month into the struggle or so, he left for France, from which he would be sending letters in which he claimed that the uprising was doomed since the Poles were ill-prepared, that the Polish peasant had no idea how to wage war properly, and that the Polish intelligentsia only wants to engage in petty politics. He was basically disappointed in everyone but himself. So it's surprising that he actually had quite a big following of supporters right up to the end of the uprising. They were known as the so-called Miroslavski faction, and they were actually a quite influential political force during the uprising. Another very colorful person was Marcin Borelowski, using the pseudonym Lelevel, taken after the famous Polish intellectual and veteran of the previous November uprising, dating back to the early 1830s. You could say that Borelowski was an impulsive and quite violent man. He didn't have any problems with quelling any tendencies of disagreement or mutiny within his own ranks or disloyalty from the peasantry. He was very meticulous and harsh when collecting the so-called national uprising tax from the population. We could also mention a person who today is often forgotten but was a very interesting character. Ludwig Kinski was an officer who had fought in the American Civil War on the side of the Confederate Army. When he found out that the January Uprising had broken out, he contacted his commander in the Confederate Army and told him, "I have fought under your banner for 2 years, but now I must return to Poland because my motherland is calling for me." His commander answered, "But now you're here and you are fighting under the Confederate banner." Kinski still managed to leave America and return to Poland by recalling to his commander the history of Tadeusz Kościuszko, Pole who had fought for the Americans during the American War of Independence but was relieved from his duty by George Washington so that he could return to Poland. And in the USA, anyone is basing their argumentations on the actions of George Washington, he is likely to be heard out. So Kinski was able to return to Poland and join the ranks of the insurgents. He became the commander of one of its units but was unfortunately taken captive, sentenced in court, imprisoned here in the 10th Pavilion of the Warsaw Citadel before being deported to the depths of Siberia. It's also worth to mention the Russian, or maybe rather the Ukrainian of Russian heritage, Mitrofan Podholuzin, using the pseudonym Hurricane. He was initially a commander of the Russian army fighting in the January Uprising. He himself was a commander of a Cossack cavalry unit and he defected to the Polish side together with his entire unit. In the process of putting down the uprising, he became convinced that the Polish side was the one who was morally right in the conflict. He was later treated very brutally by the Russian. After being wounded in battle, he was captured by the Russian and dragged behind a horse. According to a Polish legend, widely believed in Poland during the 19th century, he was then executed by being torn apart by 4 horses. In reality, he was executed by firing squad in the Radom barracks.
Significant historical events are marked by extraordinary people, and the January Uprising is of no exception. With the guide of Dr. Krzysztof Jabłonka, we will learn more about the impactful commanders of the uprising and their contributions. Outside of General Traugott, which is one of the most famous commanders during the January Uprising, I was wondering if you can elaborate on the joint efforts of the other notable commanders.
Initially, the supreme commander of the uprising was Ludwig Mirosławski. Unfortunately, he returns to France after more or less 2 weeks of fighting. The person to replace him at the top was General Langiewicz, a great friend of the Italian national hero Giuseppe Garibaldi and one of the many Poles who had participated in the wars that led to the unification of Italy. He commanded over the uprising for over a month in the winter of 1863, waging battle after battle in the south of Poland, not far from where the city of Krakow is located. Soon Langiewicz gets arrested by the Austrians, but thanks to that he evades the fate of many other commanders as he won't get killed by the Russians. Following his arrest, local commanders became more prominent, meaning the men who have proved themselves in battle and were chosen to lead by the insurgents under their command. In the mountainous Świętokrzyskie region, where Olkusz and Opatów are located, Apolinary Kurowski is in command. He is remembered for 2 unsuccessful actions: the attack on the city of Opatów, which he failed to take because he didn't agree to the tactic of setting a large section of it on fire. He believed that victory wasn't worth it if it was done at the cost of the local population. The second action was the attack on Miechów, which also failed and was the final nail in the coffin of the January Uprising. Another famous commander was Dionizy Czachowski, a cousin of the famous composer Frédéric Chopin. He fought on to the end and fell in battle as he was surrounded by Russian troops. And then we have Kołk Bosak, another famous commander, who was the commander of the region of Lublin, where an enormous unit had been created of the local peasantry. During one of the battles, the unit was under heavy bombardment by the Russian artillery, and Kołk Bosak famously told the peasants, "By every minute you withstand this, you become more and more Polish." And then we have the commanders who fought in the other parts of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In Samogitia, northwestern Lithuania, the priest Antoni Mackiewicz is in command. In southern Lithuania, Jakub Kiesztor and Zygmunt Sierakowski are in command. In Belarus, Kastuś Kalinowski commands the local insurgents, and in Ukraine we have Edmund Różycki and Platon Krzyżanowski, one Pole and the other a Ukrainian. They command over major uprisings in the region of Volhynia and Podolia. The last battles of the January Uprising take place in December 1864, but there is one more battle also worth mentioning. It was fought by the Polish diaspora, which was trying to get back to Poland to join the January Uprising. They had set out from Istanbul in the Ottoman Empire, and they fought a battle at the mouth of the Donau River against a Moldovan army right next to Kostanglia. The Romanians, however, did not want to allow them to cross their territory as an armed unit. After an inconclusive battle, the two sides decided to stop fighting and made an agreement that the Poles could continue to Poland, but individually, not as a unit. And finally, the last act of the January Uprising was the so-called Baikal insurrection. It was waged in Siberia in 1866 by Poles who had been deported there as a punishment for taking part in the January Uprising. The Baikal insurrection lasted a month and 54 Poles fell in battle.
The January Uprising was one of the most pivotal moments in the era when Poland was partitioned. The Poles would later on spend decades debating whether or not they had taken the correct path of resistance. During the interwar era, the veterans were treated as heroes, and they would later on serve as an inspiration for the soldiers fighting in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. That's it for today. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.
Poland Daily Travel. We're here in the forest, and I'm not lost because I know exactly where I am. Hello, and welcome to Poland Daily Travel, where we're taking a snowy trip to the forest. Not a lot of people know that Poland's forests occupy 29% of the country. The vast majority are state or national. We'll be visiting the forest north of Warsaw at Jabłona in Mazowiecki province. This rich tract of woodland lies east of the Wisła, or the Vistula River, and forms a vital part of the green belt around Warsaw, which includes Campinos National Park, a UNESCO-listed biosphere. On our tour, we will be guided by a forest ranger who will give us the lay of the land in one of the forests that form the lungs of the capital city. So stick with us as Poland Daily Travel goes green in the Jabłona forest. So what kind of trees are these?
It's a spruce.
These are spruce trees, yeah.
Similar to the Christmas tree.
Uh-huh.
They look like Christmas is made for it.
They look just like Christmas trees, but they're very pretty. I can see why people like them for Christmas trees. That's a really big Christmas tree.
Really big.
You would need a big roof for that.
I agree.
Yeah, it's very nice though. How many forests are there?
Forests cover almost third part of Poland.
Mm-hmm.
It's
30%.
It's exactly 29 and 4% of Poland. Of
this
territory
forest.
of Poland is
Wow,
forest.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
2% of them are national parks. There are
2%.
2% of forests in Poland are in the national park.
Wow.
We have 23 national parks.
23 national parks.
Majority of rest is administered by national forest holding states forests. It's not a private company. It's a unit of national treasury.
Okay, and where is the biggest forest in Poland? Do you know offhand?
I think
is it Campinos?
I think the Campinos is one of the biggest forests.
It's one of the. I think I heard
by very big forests are in the western part of Poland, Lubusz province. In Lubusz province.
So closer to Germany, anyway. Yeah. And what about? They say that the oldest forest is Białowieża, the oldest continuous forest in Europe. That's true, isn't it?
It's true. By this forest were used by people, by local citizens.
But it's been continuous for many hundreds of years, right? Białowieża forest.
Existed there by very long period of time, but were settled. It were used.
Yeah. It's been in use
and
this whole time. It's not this pristine piece of wood.
And it's been planted.
It's been planted.
It's been planted, replaced.
Over and over the years.
Over and over. There is one fragment, which is natural forest.
Right. And
only one small fragment in the National Park.
Yeah, but this small fragment. Is the oldest forest in Europe.
It's natural.
Right.
Right.
And that's purely natural forest. Okay, now you're clearing it up. I was a little confused. Now I see.
According to my knowledge, never been used.
Yeah. So this means that not only forests are very important in Poland, but it has the oldest undisturbed forest still existing in Europe.
Yeah.
As we know it. And that's quite incredible. So you must be very proud to be in a business that has such a deep tradition.
We are really very proud of all our forests because we have multifunctional forestry. Production function is only one of the many functions of forests. For example, another are keeping biodiversity.
Biodiversity. What exactly does that mean? What does that exactly mean? To keep biodiversity and to protect natural resources. I mean, we know that's why the parks are here, to conserve. I mean, in the United States, the first parks were started over 100 years ago, as you know, by Theodore Roosevelt, our president, who was a great outdoorsman and a naturalist in his own right. So the idea of national parks has been around for over 100 years anyway.
Or 100 years. Poland exists for 100 years.
Yeah. You mean the country, so it's only had this, it existed.
Modern Poland.
I forget, yes, modern Poland.
Modern Poland.
So there really wasn't a chance to have forests unless they were done by other occupying forces, yeah.
I think that the majority of the national parks were established after the war, the Second World War.
Yeah, okay. So it was to preserve these areas when there was a lot of transition.
Before the Second World War, the area of present Białowieża National Park, this primeval forest, were protected.
Primeval forest.
Primeval.
Yeah, and Białowieża. You said primeval. Yeah.
Were protected.
Which means ancient, right?
Were protected by state forests, like
where we are now.
Like an area, they name it sub-district, forest sub-district reserve. Okay. Forest sub-district reserve.
What are your greatest challenges going forth as a forester and a forest ranger and a man deeply interested in conservation? What are the main challenges for the Forestry Association, both national and state, and local, regional in Poland?
The biggest challenge is rebuild all stages in our forests in order to emulate the nature.
In order to
we inherited the forests similar to plantation. We want to rebuild them.
You want to rebuild the forests in a proper natural state.
In a proper natural state.
Not just as a place to harvest the product, the wood, for example, or the other things you get from a forest, but to create natural habitats and I guess natural growth of the forest.
To adjust the composition of species to the habit. We'll be able to use forest as as well. But they will be more resistant to diseases and pests.
So the challenge
and more beautiful.
Yeah, the challenge is to make them more beautiful, to make them more natural. Is not really a word. It's all natural, but to make them more diverse as a biosphere.
Yeah.
And to preserve what is there, but also to manage it. And what does management mean?
What, in your daily job, what does management mean for you?
My main task is to protect to protect forests, protect forests against the harm made from people.
Mm-hmm. So to keep people from destroying it, yeah, and to protect
and access to the Polish forest is free. Mm-hmm. Is allowed, but they have to use it by the rules, not against the law.
Mm-hmm. What are the basic rules of the forest? Since we have an expert here who spends his whole life doing this, what are the rules?
Primarily, don't harm the forest, don't be loud, don't leave the litter, be very careful with fire. Use open fire. Apart from marked places, marked and monitored places is prohibited.
Anything else that we need to know when we visit the forest? Just be respectful generally. Use your head, be respectful. Don't take anything that's not yours.
Don't take anything.
And leave things as they are. And don't burn down the forest.
You can take with you mushrooms, you can take with you berries.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much. It's been great talking to you. We have here Przemysław, who is an actual, real, as they say in Poland, prawdziwy, it means real in Polish, forest ranger. It's my first time ever spending a few hours with a man who keeps the outdoors that we all love so much in great condition. And you've really given us a great tour today and the beautiful snowy day, and it feels like it's still Christmas. It's been fantastic.
It was a pleasure for me. Thank you for all.
You're most welcome. We're going to come see you in the spring if you'll have us back.
Okay.
Okay. From us, from me, from Przemysław, this is Poland Daily Travel. Please stay with us. It's been a pleasure bringing you this program. And hey, why not? Because we do it for you. See you later.
See you later.
Bye. Come on.